Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Great to see everyone in time. So again, hi, you snuck in. So my name is Eric Scrolls, and I work with Sarah over in the College of Earth Sciences. And I have the good fortune to work with an amazing group of scholars and individuals in the Geospatial Snow, Water, Ice Resources Lab, or GeoSWirl. And so our research focus, kind of our overarching focus, is to try to bridge the connects between the temporal and the spatial differences on all things related and on questions related to the hydro and cryosphere. So that's one medium, hydro and cryosphere, but we're kind of agnostic. We work with, as you see, we work with folks across campus, College of Ag, College of Engineering. So again, we're agnostic as to what we work on, but we like to work with bright, curious minds trying to solve real world problems. As Sarah mentioned, I also am I co-direct the Geospatial Core Facility, which is, for those who aren't familiar with core facilities, they're essentially in-house research groups, or I should say kind of consulting services and with that, we're able to provide consulting services for folks in-house, meaning at MSU at a very subsidized fee structure. And we also do out-of-house, out of MSU as well. We work with a lot of federal agencies as well as private and some nonprofits too. So that's kind of what we do. But you came here for Simon, right? So today is my honor to introduce Simon Fordyce, who's going to give the rough cut seminar today. Simon is a fourth generation Montanan. Pretty much all four generations coming from central Montana. You can really see this reflected in his talk. He has a very strong connection with the land and the people, and also what that land and the people produce. And I think you'll kind of see all of those components, hopefully, coming together. No, they will. I saw the talk. It's great. So going forward, you'll see that. So as Sarah mentioned, Simon is a very busy person. So as Sarah mentioned, in addition to working on his PhD, he also is the program lead for the crop variety and testing at the Central Ag Research Center in Moccasin. And then he also finished his written comprehensive exams last week, and his oral exams are next week. So thank you for squeezing this in between. And his oral comprehensive exams are next week, so you can ask really hard questions to prepare him. Be nice to Simon. He's got a lot going on. Just his questions are as thoughtful questions. So again, his research linked his firsthand experience with the agricultural lands and people of Montana, and he is developing and testing ideas and strategies that can leverage earth science as well as agriculture to improve crops and water quality, natural resources in the region. So with that, I'll hand it to Simon, and thanks for driving down.
Well, thank you for that great introduction, and it's great to see you all today. Recognize, I'd say about half the faces in here, probably. So yeah, I've been around a bit. As Eric said, I come from the Central Ag Research Center, where I finally moved off of the research center recently. So I was actually living there for several years. It was kind of my whole life was this research center and all the research that has gone on prior to my being there, which is a lot. And we'll cover some of that today. There are three main things I want you to take away from today's talk. Really, that remote sensing, when I'm talking about remote sensing, we're thinking drones, satellites, aerial imagery. It's more than what I'm hearing it being called a precision ag tool. It's really more than that in my mind. And this is what I want you to take away. It's these three prongs of how we can use this. It's a research tool. We can use it to scale up processes, understand our problems across different spatial and temporal scales. It's a management tool, and it can guide farmers in soil sampling efforts and help them understand their soil variability, and also to make management decisions. So varying inputs at a subfield scale is one example of that. It's also an educational tool, and this will be the main thrust at the end of the talk, where we talk about how these free, publicly available data sources can be really a low-tech entry point into precision ag. It's a gateway technology to help farmers get their foot in the door without this huge overbearing threat of these high upfront input costs. So as a research tool, remote sensing is allows us to do a lot of things across different spatial scales. This talk is going to focus on agrohydrology. You're looking at a definition of it now. Agrohydrology is really how available water resources influence agriculture, but also how agriculture influences available water resources. So it's that two-way street, water resources to management practices and management practices back to water resources. This term is, it's not a formal definition, it's not a formal discipline, so to speak. It's kind of used informally. But recently a paper by Smith et al. Defined the future of this discipline, grouped it into 7 different research themes that you can see here. A couple of these are beyond the scope of today's talk, but we'll hit on most of them. So this is what that two-way street, I think, for about a century, since the inception of the Central Lake Research Center, was more of a one-way street, where they thought a lot about how water impacted management, right? It impacted the agricultural potential of the region. And so a lot of what that meant, since this is a semi-arid landscape with not a lot of irrigation potential, is developing drought management strategies. One of the most familiar drought management strategies would be fallow, leaving the land idle to store water for subsequent crops. This transformed as we began to understand some of the implications, the environmental implications of fallow in recent times. So this kind of kicked off when a paper by Smith and Mulder documented that, or linked nitrate in groundwater to fertilizer as a fertilizer source. They use isotopes to make that link. And this kicked off a lot of research. Stephanie Ewing, Clayne Jones, Adam Sigler, Rob Payne, all in this room today, all had a lot of, all did a lot in the decade between, in the 2010s, basically, to define this research that's going on, how we are impacting these water resources, and with specific implications for the nitrate leaching problem. How do we optimize nitrogen use efficiency at multiple scales and with what practices, right? So we keep it out of the groundwater, get it into those crops that the farmers want to raise. And in 2020, this really became what I've become to think of as precision agrohydrology. And that was a 2020 paper from Adam Sigler, in which he used remote sensing indices to describe soil properties at the subfield scale, and then scale that up to generalize his implications. And so precision agrohydrology, in my mind, is agrohydrology that becomes more remote sensing focused, or spatial, more focused on scaling up results, thinking about these processes at multiple spatial scales. And with that, we see a lot enter the Sproles lab and the GeoSwirl lab. We're thinking about snow water availability at these fine spatial scales, so that we can help define available water on the landscape, right? Where is the water, and how is it being stored? How much of that water is being stored for crops, related to different management practices. In 2025, late 2025, we start to understand that there's really inconsistent effects where we can capture snow, but we can't. That doesn't always translate into yield effects, right? Or even soil moisture effects. So understanding these dependencies, why snow enters the profile sometimes, why it does not, and what are the implications for crop production, economic sustainability, and environmental, as well as the environmental impact of some of these management practices. So to understand why there's all this controversy, why snow matters sometimes and not others, we really need to know about soil thickness. Why is soil thickness important? It's because it is determining the soil water storage potential in these soils, right? And with Adam Sigler's work, that seminal paper, we understand that these very thin soils don't have as much, can't store as much water. So they spend more time in a state that is primed for water loss, whether that's evaporation or deep percolation. You can lose nutrients at the bottom when that water goes, when that water percolates, it can carry nitrate with it. So this is a major determinant on the nitrogen use efficiency at the subfield scale, but also at landscape scales. We can see this when we look at agronomic studies that are conducted both in shallow soils and elsewhere. So an overall goal, which I don't have on there anymore, one of the overarching goals is to understand water storage potential of these soils so that we can then begin aligning our nitrogen needs with them. We can't optimize our nitrogen use using precision technologies or any other technologies without understanding our water storage. We need to align our nitrogen applications with the water that we can store. So enter the characterization of soil moisture using remote sensing technologies, right? Synthetic aperture radar is a way to, you can obtain soil moisture retrievals using this technology. It's an active sensor. These microwaves penetrate to a certain depth, but they don't penetrate deep enough, even in a thin soil, to characterize that soil water storage under normal field conditions, right? This is a function of the dielectric properties of soil. So when a microwave hits the soil surface, if there's a lot of water in that soil that is not bound, then that water will attenuate a microwave signal, and it will prevent it from penetrating deep enough into the profile. So what I was interested in understanding, and this would be one of the first chapter of the dissertation, is under abnormal field conditions, and specifically frozen soils, because water is now bound, it's less able to attenuate that microwave signal. Will it penetrate deeply enough to the bottom of the profile to be able to give us soil water storage retrievals, not just surface soil moisture retrievals, but soil water storage estimates? So that's the main question. Are these radar waves penetrating? The hypothesis framework we're using here is we predict that under wet conditions, we have a lot of free water that isn't bound. Those microwaves will attenuate quickly, and they won't penetrate deeply into the profile. They remain at the surface. As that soil profile begins to dry down, you end up with more bound water. So a microwave can penetrate deeper, and we expect there to be a conditional signal here where microwaves are penetrating deeply enough in shallow soils, but not in thick soils. And that would manifest as a logistic plateau pattern. And then finally, we get to these frozen soils. This is what this looks like. We see an interaction with that gravel layer, that cobbly layer at the bottom of the profile, regardless of how thick or thin the soil really is. We did this at the Central Ag Research Center and on 5 farms on the Moccasin Terrace. I focused on snow-free periods, and that's critical. Snow-free periods where soils are frozen at depth or beyond 20 centimeters, those are not normal conditions, right? That's an unusual circumstance. So that is a limitation of this work. We did that on purpose so we can look at this signal later on. We regressed our SAR backscatter coefficients, so the amount of signal that's returning to that sensor. We regressed that against soil thickness predictions from previous work. What we found that was we did not have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So regression failed to show it supports an insufficient penetration depth using this technology, this synthetic aperture radar, ALOS pulsar. It's an L-band signal. So that backscatter did not follow those trends. However, I would invite you to blur your eyes a little bit and look at the shape of that data. It does look like we are approaching that conditional signal, right? However, I couldn't get a nonlinear model to fit it. I would say it's not null, however. This is what we're calling the cobble signal, where we have this distinct backscatter distributions where soils are very thin. What we think is happening there is that there are interactions with soil with cobbles underlying the surface. It's scattered. It's not always consistent, but in those very thinnest soils, that signal can be detected. In those, here you can see this is about an acre field, and you can see what that looks like here. Those are clustering together. We're seeing that with that's what I'm calling a cobble signature. It's a hot, Sigler called it a hot spot. Could be leveraged to identify these thin and cobbly soils. We did this for one field. We also did this across fields, and that signal showed up in both models. So the next step for this research, these soils are frozen at depth. That's an atypical state without snow cover. So we really, going forward, we want to understand the snowpack impacts, how that impacts the penetration depth into soils. We need to quantify that. This becomes important when you think about a recent technology that was just made available. It's collecting data as we speak. This was NISAR. It's an L-band SAR launched in 2025. We're in a double pass at the Central Ag Research Center, so we get more frequent returns than most people, and that'll be a smaller resolution to a 5 meter pixel size. So that's the next step for this. We want to use those new technologies that are out there to begin to understand that cobble signature, to be able to run that model and try to understand how snowpack and different soil moisture conditions impact our penetration depth of L-band SAR. Likely that SAR analysis will fail when snowpack is present. So we want to be able to predict that. We want to be able to understand when snowpack is present. We have some tools to help us with that. One is a hydromet sonar that returns hourly snow depth measurements from the hydromet. It's a point measurement. We also have a terrestrial LiDAR scanning a field at the CARC. That'll give us temporally and spatially resolute snow depth. So we can make that a daily scan if we want. We can make it an hourly scan, and we have adjusted that at a few key points during this winter to look at snow melt and try to understand how this variability aligns or not with what you measure at that point from hydromet, right? And we want to understand the subfield spatial variability of snow depth to refine our depth analysis, and we need to know where that point measurement of snow depth is falling within the distribution of snow depths that we find out on the landscape. There's a picture of our terrestrial LiDAR scanner. We have this pointed at an experiment, a field experiment with an alternative design. I've entitled the snowflake design. This has this exact design has not been tried before, although there are radial plot designs that you can find. Basically what we're doing here is using crop sequences to manipulate the surface roughness in a small area so that we can scan it with our LiDAR sensor and understand fine scale variability in snow catch patterns. The radius of this is only about 20 meters. However, by manipulating different things like the orientation to the prevailing wind and understanding how that interacts with deposition and ablation processes, we can get a range of conditions for the snowpack and also understand, hopefully, how much of that is entering the soil, what's contributing to that, to when snow enters the soil versus when it blows away, that kind of thing. We've got a high, we now have, I only saw this a couple days ago. We have our first terrestrial LiDAR map over this 20 meter-ish radius. And we are seeing, this is preliminary data, but we are seeing different snow catch environments, right? We're seeing snow deposition and ablation. This was a large event in early February. I have point measurements that I'm taking throughout the season as well within the study area. We've seen that prevailing wind is in fact impacting the snow catch. We've seen that the stubble environment also in thinner snowpacks, I don't see it in this image, the stubble environment in the center is also creating differences in snowpacks as we would expect. This work is ongoing. This experiment is in right now. I'm not going to say anything else about it other than this looks like a very promising way to be able to understand how our point snow depth measurements from networks like Mesonet and Hydromet are describing or not what goes on the landscape in terms of snow dynamics. So there's a lot of, so over the past 15 years, there's been a lot of support, mechanistic support for technologies that will vary nitrogen at a subfield scale. We've done a lot of work to understand the available water across the landscape and the distribution of it. And now, not just now, but in past years as well, I myself have been pretty excited about variable rate technology. So specifically variable rate fertilizer application. So we can start to optimize nitrogen use efficiency at a subfield scale. Now that we know about the water, we can align our nitrogen with it. But there's a big problem with variable rate technology. We have a huge adoption problem. Adoption of all precision ag tech is complex. I don't want to say it's unique in this case to variable rate fertilizer, but one of the main barriers is the high initial input costs, right? These implements are expensive. There's also a fair bit of skepticism as to whether they work, right? And that's led me to observe that these technologies are kind of polarized. There's a certain amount of controversy involved in discussing high cost precision ag technology like variable rate fertilizer. Unfortunately, what I'm showing here is not adoption of these technologies. It is what is profitable for dealerships, right? Now, I thought that was interesting that variable rate fertilizer is the most profitable technology for agricultural dealerships. This is a nationwide survey. And then you find UAV and drone imagery and satellite imagery down at the bottom, right? So it's great for industry, probably not so great for farmers having to spend that money up front. So it's making at the national scale a lot of money for dealerships. When you get to Montana, the interest in variable rate technology completely collapses, right? We've in a 2019 survey, it was when asked what farmers found most useful when making nitrogen fertilizer decisions, it was ranked 5th above other, dead last on the list. Producer listening session made no mention of variable rate technology, although other precision ag technologies were mentioned, including satellite imagery, as well as virtual fencing. And then if you look at over time, it's clear that these grid sampling efforts are really not taking hold in Montana, even though they are in other locations. So we can have all of the elements of a successful technology, but the social factors are really preventing it from being implemented across the landscape. So what I wanted to understand, this is the final chapter of my dissertation. What I want to understand here is how educators are thinking about precision agriculture, how they're communicating precision agriculture, so that we can hone in on why some technologies are winners, why technologies are losers, why there's this controversial aspect to precision ag and the cultural polarization that goes on here. We did a qualitative case study. We focused on 6 MSU extension specialists across 3 programs. integrated pest management, soil and water quality, and horticulture, representing a range of connectedness to precision ag. And then we did semi-structured interviews, which each of them, where we allowed a little bit of flexibility in our interview questions, but we transcribed all of the interviews and did structural coding to understand some of the emerging themes. Really, again, trying to understand how educators think and communicate precision ag to farmers. This is a way we can reach a lot of farmers without having to do that as much groundwork. And farmers are survey fatigued, as a lot of you know in this room. What we found from this work was that educators are using the back door. I don't know if I've used an analogy. Sometimes if you go into a small town Montana bar, right? You walk in the front door, nobody knows you, everybody turns around and looks at you, right? The whole bar just turns around and looks at you, and you're like, I don't know about this. So you go in the back door, and nobody knows, right? It's like you're coming back from the bathroom or something. So you can sneak in without all that daunting fear, and that's really how I think about this. Is remote sensing is or really talking about specific technologies, avoiding the use of the term precision agriculture. That's a way for educators to go in the back door to avoid all that fear. And it's a way for farmers to go in the back door as well and avoid that fear of stepping into the precision ag world, thinking, what the heck am I doing? Everybody's looking at me. Educators, Montana Extension educators are prioritizing those specific applications with an emphasis on low-tech solutions, including remote sensing, right? Remote sensing came up over and over and over again in these interviews. So that's a gateway technology, right? We've got satellite drones, and it's an entry point to precision ag. It lowers the barrier of entry to these specific technologies. Remote sensing also can be very useful in educational talks, right? A lot of educators talked about this. It helps farmers visualize spatial variability, and it can make these abstract concepts like nitrogen use efficiency, water use efficiency. It can make them really get their arms around it, and they can feel that, walk away understanding, feeling like they understand the problem. Another thing that came out of this work was that there's this information gap, right, between what farmers find useful and what we can determine from the studies that we're doing. These deterministic studies aren't always answering the questions that farmers want. These reductionist approaches aren't providing integrated decisions. And you can read that blurb. It's one of the best quotes. There's so many great quotes from these interviews. I had a really hard time deciding what to put up here. But I think this is really at the crux of it, right? And for me, and maybe this is more of a personal belief, but for me, remote sensing tools are exactly what farmers need to be able to think across scales and make more system-based decisions, right? So systems research, one of the cruxes of it is, on-farm research in combination with small plot trials at research centers. So even if you're thinking about if it helps a farmer understand how results at a research center translate or not to their own farm, these tools are helping make increasing systems knowledge, really is how I think about it. Farmers can use this. It's a sort of a transformational educational tool that can increase systems-based thinking in semi-arid ecosystems. Recommendations for educators. A lot of this I feel we are doing because I was clearly in these interviews not the educator, but and most of these ideas came from them themselves. Lead with low-cost problem-solving applications. Don't focus on this precision ag brand, and that even goes for remote sensing. Don't talk about remote sensing. Talk about specific satellites, specific technologies, and how it translates to either economic profitability or minimizing environmental impact or simply yield. We need to be specific about what these tools can do for farmers. And then these peer, a lot of this is known, it's already in the literature, informal peer networks. We need to bring local producers in. If anybody's ever sat on a panel, listen to a panel of farmers, these things are hugely educational. And then get us as researchers, as educators out into the fields, as farmers engage with these new technologies. It gives us a shared sense of ownership, and it can contribute to systems-based knowledge that way as well. And as a sort of take-home point, I guess, we can think about how individual technologies, we had all this justification, and there's obviously all of this potential for variable rate on this landscape. But the potential of the technology might not be driving what matters, really, adoption, right? It's the communication context around it. We need to be making sure that these messages are holistic, that we're talking about yield, about economic sustainability, and about environmental impact when we discuss these technologies. So back to our take homes for today. I wanted you to understand that PA, remote sensing in precision agriculture, is a research tool. It's a management tool and an educational tool. We know that we can use remote sensing to scale up to make our results more generalizable, or scale down to understand more detailed processes, and specifically in agrohydrology. I think that remote sensing is actually a critical tool to advance agrohydrology to that precision realm. We know that remote sensing can be a management tool. We're trying to get these data sets up online where we can predict nitrate leaching hotspots across management boundaries, so that these layers can be used as prescription maps for things like variable rate nitrogen fertilizers. If the map already exists, maybe that'll encourage some adoption. And foremost, this is an educational tool. It's a low-tech gateway to precision ag. It's an entry point for farmers, so they don't step into the bar thinking, get me out of here now, everyone's looking at me, right? With that, I want to thank you all for coming. This has been a really well advertised talk. I've got so many people. I met somebody on the plane the other day who was like, I saw you talking. Like, oh, you were from English science, English department or something, and she saw that. So I've had a lot of people come up to me, and I want to thank you guys for doing that. It's huge, because a lot of these talks I know don't make it out to the university. So it's been great. It's been one of the bigger talks I've given in a long time, and I thank you for the invite.